Thanks everybody for joining us for this virtual press conference to talk about housing issues. Just some lay of the land for the agenda, and just a reminder for folks to mute their line during the press conference. We are going to have stories from legislators and then several folks, and I'll just be kind of serving as our MC. Throughout the press conference, there is a chat function for members of the press. If you have a question that comes up during the press conference, feel free to utilize the chat function to write in a question. And when we conclude the speakers, we should have some time also for folks to ask questions if it comes up after the fact. And with that, I think we will kick things off. And first, I want to introduce Chair of the Housing Committee, Representative Alice Hausman, to start things off.
Thank you. My first time, of course, for a virtual press conference, and I've already discovered one thing. Because I'm at home and my laptop is at the office and I am stuck with using an iPad, I do not recommend that. So here we go. It is April 1st, today is April 1st, and rents are due. And we have been told that since the start of this virus, over 250,000 people have applied for unemployment insurance. And they come, many of them, from restaurants and bars and retail. And we know something about the economic reality of those positions. And we believe that many of those individuals are one paycheck away from not being able to pay their rent. And we are thinking today about renters, we are thinking about landlords, we are thinking about small businesses, all of whom are going to be affected very, very quickly. And should this happen for 2 or 3 months before they are all back to work, that debt load becomes really unbearable. And so today we want to talk about how the state might provide rental assistance, because we want to keep everyone safe. At this particular healthcare crisis, it's in our best interest as a state to assure that all of those individuals, whether they are renters or landlords or small businesses, are kept housed and safe and stable. And so we'll talk a little bit about rental assistance today. We will hear stories from some of those individuals. The interesting thing for me is that so many groups came together around this particular issue. Homes for All, the Homes for All Coalition, Minnesota Multi-Housing, MICA, which is the Metropolitan Interfaith Council on Affordable Housing, the Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, Warren Hansen has talked about this. They've all come together around the great need for rental assistance to help keep everyone stable. So we'll hear some stories today. I think now we're going to hear from our Republican lead on the Housing Committee, Representative Tama.
Thank you, Alice. What a wonderful experience. We're all expanding our horizons while we're stuck inside and can't leave. And I just got my laptop last week. So it really has been quite an experience for us all. And I just want to make sure that people know that we support helping people make their rental payments, their mortgage payments, their contract for deed payments during the next few months of economic disruption. And we also need to be fiscally responsible in ensuring that the appropriation matches the immediate need. Here in St. Cloud, my husband and I have several properties, and there's several things we have to look at. It's not just the rent payment. That also covers the utility payments, and I'm not really sure what's going to happen with property taxes that are due the middle of May. So we need to make sure that we do get whatever monies we appropriate into the right hands. We need to make sure that the folks who are having issues making their rent and can document it be the ones that we make sure are getting the money. We want to make sure the money goes to those that are hardest hit and that are struggling the most. And we want to make sure that we have rental owners making their payments, because we don't want to come out of this and not have a rental inventory that we've been counting on and that has been working for us kind of okay right now, but we'd really like to see more coming up. And we know that housing is short right now. but we need to make sure that we have enough going so that we don't run into anything where people just can't afford to do it. I'm hoping that we can look at some amounts for this appropriation that are really reasonable, and then if it doesn't make it, then we need to come back and adjust it so that we make sure people are made whole and that they can do that. And I have a few concerns about the executive order, and that there aren't enough guardrails. We don't want people to think that it's okay to take a holiday from paying your rent. Those that can pay their rent need to make sure that they can do so, and to communicate to their landlord, their rental owner, that yes, they are able to do it. Most landlords that I know, most rental owners that I know are more than willing to make some kind of a deal in saying, if this is what you can afford, that's great. Let's go from there. So I'm just asking people as well, make sure that you are being very honest about whether or not you need to have some help, because on the federal level, we need to look too on what's covered and what isn't. And there's a lot of variables going on. So again, we're asking for your patience. And with that, thank you very much. And I will turn it over back to Mike.
Thank you, Representative. Today, hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of Minnesotans have either their rent due or their mortgage due. And that can be a stressful time under normal circumstances. I mean, we know that several 100,000 Minnesotans before the COVID epidemic were cost burdened, meaning they're paying more than 30% of their income on rent. Many people are paying more than 50%. And we also know that the workers that have been mostly affected, the sectors, were also folks that were likely to be in that situation already. And so although there's been actions we've taken in terms of unemployment insurance, action at the federal level, we know that for tens or hundreds of thousands of Minnesotans on this date, April 1st, it is going to be stressful, and it's going to be challenging for folks to afford their rent. And our message to renters is that, the governor has signed an executive order to ensure that people aren't able to be evicted during this public health crisis. And that makes sense. I mean, for the public health reason, we can't be increasing the amount of homelessness. But the clear, as Representative Theis mentioned, the executive order does not cancel rent. And so the urgency for us is to make sure that we're providing resources so that renters have the ability to make their rent and landlords have the ability to make their mortgage. We're all in this together. And what we are proposing is an investment in housing assistance through what's called Family Homelessness Prevention programs, or FHPAPs. And there's a couple reasons why there's consensus that this makes the most sense. One, we're able to use existing service providers that service all 87 counties in Minnesota. They already know how to provide rental assistance and can do so directly and efficiently. We have heard, the federal government has passed some resources, but we don't know how quick those are going to be delivered. It's important for the state to step up, and we have the ability to do so. And I wanted to highlight something that Representative Hausman mentioned, that we have consensus here amongst our renters and our landlords. Our Homes for All Coalition is advocating for a $100 million investment in the FHPAP housing assistance program, and so are our landlords, the Minnesota Multi-Housing Association. So with that consensus, we need to work together on a bipartisan basis to move forward with rental assistance, with housing assistance. We're all in this together, and today is a good day for us to recognize that and to show a sense of urgency to move forward. Next, I want to introduce Ann Mavity, the Executive Director of the Minnesota Housing Partnership. Thank you.
Thanks so much. So I'll just note, I agree with absolutely everything that's been said so far. Minnesota Housing Partnership, we provide research and we lead advocacy in Minnesota to advance affordable housing. We also work directly with our tribal partners and rural communities to help support their efforts to create more affordable housing. And we are also a leader and champion in the Homes for All statewide coalition, which has more than 250 organizations around the state advocating for affordable housing. So MHP and Homes for All support this $100 million emergency investment in housing assistance. And as the representatives have already noted, the investment helps in two ways. One, it ensures that the lowest wage workers can pay their rent and not fall so far behind that it'll be impossible to ever catch up. And it ensures that our housing providers have sufficient operating income to continue to provide housing, which is really one of the essential infrastructures that we need right now. So, the speed at which we are absorbing changes in our personal lives and in our public lives, in our economy, is incredible. And we're trying to very quickly make sense of what this will mean to the individuals most impacted and to the affordable housing providers and the industry. And we're doing this in real time with limited information and information we're still trying to wrap our heads around. But this is what we know. So today, it was reported that 255,000 workers, or 9% of the Minnesota workforce, has filed for unemployment insurance. And we know that this is underreported, as many of our self-employed and low-wage workers are unable to access even this safety net resource. So I'm going to share, I'm going to share some data that we have put together to demonstrate, hang on one second, to demonstrate what we're talking about in terms of the impact. So the people most impacted are those that we frankly appreciate more than ever before, who are an essential part of our economic fabric, the food service workers, retail jobs, things like that. But even with unemployment insurance, these minimum wage workers will receive about half their typical earnings. And as Representative Howard noted, they had previously already been paying much more than they could afford for their housing. And what we know is that now with their wages cut in half, they need to essentially use almost all of their income in order to pay their rent. So let me look at, one more screen sharing moment. I am so sorry. My technology is slightly slow here. Okay, I am having just one small glitch in my technology. I apologize. So what does it all mean in any case? What it means is that there's almost nothing left over for food, for healthcare, for other life essentials. And so as we are trying to, as we are trying to make sure that people have enough income just to survive on, we're concerned that the eventual cascade of non-payment of rents will leave folks so far behind that they will never be able to catch up. So once the moratorium ends, if someone is trying to pay $1,000 a month and they're falling behind on a minimum wage, there's just no way to catch up again. So that's what makes this rental assistance critical. Then the last thing I'll just note is that it's also critical for our housing providers and to ensure the continuity of our entire housing system. So it's the first of the month and rent and mortgage payments are due today. Now, in the housing world, we measure performance by monthly and quarterly payments or 15-year and 30-year mortgages. So the fast pace of these impacts is extraordinary, and it's still unknown. The crisis started in March, and yesterday it was still March. But what we do know is that most housing providers might have a month or two of reserves on hand. But if we experience 20% non-payment, it could cost our state and the providers nearly $8 million a month. The New York Times is reporting an anticipated 40% non-payment. And over several months, this will add up to be unsustainable for our housing industry. So we have an unprecedented alignment of stakeholders who want this housing assistance. It's not complicated. It's really just math. And we certainly support the $100 million in housing assistance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ann. Next, we're going to hear from Annette Wilson to share her perspective.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, how you doing? How you guys doing this morning? My name is Annette Wilson again, and I am a resident of Brooklyn Park, Minnesota. Here, I was affected by the Corona-19 as far as the rental payment, but I was working and my hours were cut back on the job that I was working for, but I was fortunate to find another job that would actually provide enough income for me to make my rent payment. But I also, and it doesn't provide all for what I have. Like it cut back on a lot of things. Like I have car notes and things like that in nature. So I have to kind of juggle right now to be able to juggle the rent of not receiving, because I was living on a different kind of income before all this happened here. But my biggest concern here, again, I'm fortunate right now to be able to make my rent payment, but I live in a Huntington Place, and my biggest concern right now of the rent payment is a lot of the parents, the single parents here in the Huntington Place with children, like what is going to happen with the children when their parents can't afford to make the rent payment and be able to take care of the children at the same time of being able to provide, food and things like that for them. That's what my major focus right now is the children and how it's going to affect the children in the Brooklyn Park area right now.
Thank you, Annette. Next, we have Jennifer Spadini, owner of Guardian Properties Management.
Thank you. Hello, my name is Jennifer Spadini, and I am the owner of Guardian Property Management. We manage single-family homes, duplexes, small apartment buildings. We are managing properties in every city within the metro area. We manage 850 units of over 200 owners, and we're housing approximately 1,500 residents. As a property manager, we are counting on the rents to pay for the mortgages, property taxes, insurance, the upkeep of the buildings, the upkeep of the units, as well as our employees to keep them employed. We have had residents reach out to us that have been laid off. They're feeling afraid and overwhelmed about losing their housing. They do not have income and have great concern over unemployment not covering their rent. And some do not qualify for unemployment. Some have told us that they have April rent covered, but they have no idea how they will come up with May rent. A few residents are unable to work due to health conditions, so they're required to be quarantined. We have yet to hear about residents that are unable to work because they have the virus, but we know that's coming. To help with this pandemic, we are letting the residents know that we are in this together. We're waiving late fees. We're making payment arrangements with the residents. We are assuring them that they will not be evicted and letting them know that Governor Walz also called for this in his executive order. Everyone we have talked to has been very reasonable, but they feel so much uncertainty as we do. We strongly support a rent stimulus package to pay the rent so we can pay mortgages and property taxes, keep the buildings running in a safe, well-maintained manner, especially during this health crisis. We all need a safe place to call home. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jennifer. Next, we have Gina Vinji, owner of 500 Fifth Avenue Salon in New Brighton.
Hi, good morning. I'm Gina. I'm a small business owner and a cosmetologist, and I make a living providing services, hair and spa services for my clients. We've been closed since March 17th and will be closed until at least May 2nd. And while we understand this is for the good of the public's health, it really does have great economic consequences for me and my family. So I can't work in my professional field right now, and being a small business owner and being self-employed, we don't right now qualify for unemployment. So that gets to be really scary, right now. Just coming into April, like it feels okay, but then looking forward to May, it starts to get really scary. And I know that there's thousands of other business owners that I know that are small business owners that are in the same position. Like we just, looking for something, So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Gina. In a minute, we'll open it up for questions to the press. I'm just going to offer some closing comments here. And just to say that, I think a lot of us have been inspired over the last couple of weeks how Minnesotans have come together and rallied around each other and truly understood that this COVID-19 pandemic won't be solved unless we all have a stake in solving it and working together. And clearly, the path to do that is to stay home and stay safe. But ultimately, Minnesotans can't stay home and stay safe if they can't afford the roof over their heads. That's why we need to show urgency to pass housing assistance for Minnesotans and to do so very quickly. April 1st is here today, and May 1st will be here before we know it. So it's time for us to work together and take action as Minnesotans so that Minnesotans can stay home and stay safe. With that, we'd like to open it up for questions to the press. I know there are several members of the press here, so want to do this as orderly as possible. If folks are able to write a question in the chat function, that would be appreciated. We can also have folks unmute themselves and ask questions and try to do some of that as well.
This is Marty Moylan. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So what's the timeline for resolving what rental assistance there will be in the 100 million? Who's on board with the 100 million to start with?
I can take that. The four groups that I mentioned before, Homes for All, the Minnesota Multi-Housing, MICA, Greater Minnesota Housing Fund, all have had action alerts around that amount. We obviously have to be in conversation with the governor's office and the agency and the senators. But I think the stories we're hearing are our motivation to say this is a time for really some hard conversations. We need to be in partnership with those individuals who are struggling with that harsh economic reality right now. So hopefully, I think the next time we might be gathering is April 14th. My hope would be that we could have some resolution of this by that day and that we could quickly move on that particular day when we gather, whether we gather and vote remotely or at the Capitol, I'm not certain, but that's my goal at this point, to shoot for the April 14th date.
And we have a question from Mary LaHammer, which is what's the interplay with federal and state dollars? And we do know that the federal government has approved some economic assistance, some one-time checks, some resources to bump up those on unemployment insurance. We're evaluating exactly what that impact is going to be for Minnesotans related to housing. We do know that Minnesota, the state, is better positioned to deliver aid on housing assistance more quickly than the federal government. And the particular program we're building consensus around allows us to provide rental assistance in the most efficient way possible, where we're helping folks cover rent and helping landlords cover their mortgage in a direct way.
The timing that I see on this is that knowing the federal government is going to move much more slowly than we. I already have read in the newspaper that though the expectation of some was that it was going to happen in a month or so, but the departments that have to make it happen are saying it's going to take longer than that. The advantage we have in the state is we're proposing to funnel the money through an existing program, so we don't have to set up new systems. We have something in place already. So my sense is that the state money might be able to get out the door and help with this economic crisis more quickly than the federal government can.
Representative Hausman, if I could follow up on that, does this need legislation, or can the governor access that money via executive order?
I don't believe that he would be able to appropriate money. I think that would have to be something that the legislature would have to come back to do.
And you think so far you wouldn't come back till the 14th of April, or would you need to come back sooner?
There is an accommodation in that agreement between the leaders. They said if they all agree that we come back earlier, that's still a possibility.
Thank you.
I would like to see us start at a lower number, probably around 10 to 30 million, and then work ourselves up, because our surplus is gone. There is no longer a surplus. And I don't want us to run out of funds entirely. So I would like to see us start slower and then go up as we see fit and as we can afford. Obviously, there isn't going to be as much for taxes coming in. So our revenue is going to be a lot more limited. And I want to help as many people that really need the help. And that's why I think it's crucial that we make sure we're targeting the folks that are in most need.
And we have a question to elaborate on who would qualify for this housing stimulus plan. That is part of the discussion we're having amongst the House and Senate. And traditionally, this program serves lower income Minnesotans at 200% of federal poverty guidelines and below. And we are looking at increasing that to about 300%. So at the high end, that could be, I believe, a family of four with an income of about $70,000. Now, I would say if we are increasing that amount of people who would qualify, and I think we should, because I think the need is going to be so great, that also affects the amount of dollars we need to make sure we're serving the Minnesotans most in need. And in terms of process, a person would be able to apply through their service provider and show that their income has dropped and that they need rental assistance. The provider would provide a direct check to the landlord to help cover their rent. We have another question from Kara Levin about the eviction moratorium. Hearing reports that a specific landlord has informed residents that they still can evict tenants and that it will affect their credit rating. And the question is, what can folks do about that? One element of the executive order does include penalties for landlords that engage in this practice. And the Attorney General, Keith Ellison, will be serving in an enforcement role. So I would encourage, if you're a tenant and you're having an issue with the landlord, one, contact your state legislator about that, and also contact the Attorney General's office, because the executive order, the governor makes clear that for the public health reason, we're not able to evict people during this public health emergency. And I would say that landlords in general, we haven't heard that yet. And their guidance, as Jennifer mentioned, has been to tell folks not to do that, to suspend late fees and to work with renters. And that's partly why we're here on this call today, is to make sure that we're communicating to folks that we're all in this together. And if that's not happening, we need to hear about it.
And the governor did make very clear in his briefing this week that though his executive order calls for a moratorium on evictions, we are not forgiving debt. And so that debt does need to be dealt with in some way. And that's why we're proposing that the state partner with renters as they face those looming debts.
We have another question from Marty Moylanen with NPR. What about giving landlords a break on paying property taxes? Let them delay payments.
I have a strong feeling about that.
Okay.
Local governments, cities and counties, are also dealing with their own burdens. And if we make any decisions about forgiving property taxes, that falls heavily on local governments. And that's probably a direction I would not want to go, because we can't put more burdens on local governments at this time. So forgiving property taxes would directly affect them.
I did have a conversation with our county administrator and just asked him what the possibility might be. And his response was more, we could handle some, but not a lot. Obviously, they don't want to drain their funds as well. But I think what you'll see is a lot of folks just working things out and doing what they can right now. And I think that's all we ask of anybody is do what you can right now. So we can do more talking with our county folks, especially, and seeing where they're sitting on all this.
We have a question about asking us to elaborate on the conversations with the Senate. I can report that we had conversations last week, and we had hoped to move forward with this during the last time we were in, and we weren't able to do so. But we're hoping to re-engage in those conversations. And I do think that there is some bipartisan consensus around the need, and hopefully we can have those conversations and move forward on April 14th. There's another question about how we decided on the $100 million figure. And admittedly, it is challenging in this new world to really assess the level of need. But as we're gaining information and data about the number of folks that are unemployed, the sectors that are unemployed, and in consultation with housing providers, the agency, we believe the $100 million figure captures the need. And I will mention one thing that we've highlighted in our conversations with the Senate. We think it would make sense because of the uncertainty to direct those resources back to the general fund if they went unspent. I think they likely will get spent because of the extreme need. And I think Ann Mavity could comment. She presented some of the data that underscores the need for $100 million.
Thanks, Mike. A couple weeks ago, when MHP led an effort which now has over 50 supporters signing on to it in a letter requesting the $100 million for rental assistance, and particularly for all the reasons you've noted, Mike, being deployed through the FHPHP program because it's an existing efficient way to deploy that funding. The $100 million, and again, if you look on the MHP website, we have a COVID-19 page that provides an analysis, estimates at this point, of course, about both what the impact will be, not just on the individual, but again, looking at a 20% non-payment, a 40% non-payment, et cetera. And what we're estimating is that if there was a 20% non-payment, this could total almost $86 million to our state, to the industry themselves in terms of lost income. And we absolutely need those resources, again, for the individuals, but also to prop up our housing system and make sure that we are able to continue to provide that housing. And I'll just note as well that the federal stimulus bill, I noticed a question earlier about this, we're still trying to wrap our hands around everything that might come through or might not come through with that. But folks that receive vouchers or rental assistance through federal sources, public housing, are paying 30% of their income. What we know is that even if that's a very low income, when that goes to zero, there's a gap. And a lot of the federal assistance is intended to help pay that gap. So if someone previously could have paid $400 a month towards their $700 rent, now we have that $500 gap per month. So the federal assistance is largely going to pay for those federal programs and those gaps. So that's why we need state assistance for the vast array of others who do not have access to those kinds of assistance programs already.
Representative Howard, I think it's important to add to the person who asked the question about where did that $100 million come from. Actually, the $100 million did not come from legislators. It wasn't legislators who made that determination. It was all of those housing advocates who are out there working on a daily basis. So that number is theirs, and it did not come from the legislature.
Thank you. We have a question from Theo from Fox 9 about the direct payments from providers to landlords. Would they cover the entire rent or a percentage? And also just a little bit about who are these providers. We want to make sure that we're helping Minnesotans be able to afford their rent. And as Ms. Mavity mentioned, I believe that cost burden figure, there's wide recognition that if you're paying more than 30% of your income on rent, you are cost burdened. And so we believe that for lower income Minnesotans that, might be needing to pay 80, 90% of their income on rent, they will need a larger direct assistance from landlords than maybe somebody that is closer up to that $70,000 income range, the high income side. And by doing some of that targeting, we'd be able to make sure that we're stretching our dollars further and helping people to be able to afford their rent. And then a question, guidance for renters that are struggling to make rent right now. On that first, just wanting to communicate the empathy for renters in this extreme situation they're in. I'm getting emails every single day. I just got one this morning from Amber from Brainerd. Her husband owns a small business that they just started 2 years ago, and it's a construction business, and they've seen that business drop off. And then in the last week, Amber, she lost her job at a resort up in Brainerd. And so instantly their family, and they have several children, has lost both of their income, and only one of them may qualify for UI, and they think they can cobble together the rent for this month, but are really concerned when May 1st comes around. And I think so many Minnesotans are in this place. And so one, what we would tell renters is that we hear you, we see you, and that we as leaders in the state need to do something about it and have your back. Specifically though, we want renters to talk with their landlords and tell them their situation. And if you are able to pay rent on April 1st, do so. What we don't want to do is see folks get so far behind on the rent that they cannot emerge. And so our message today is to work with your landlords to pay your rent, and then to keep contacting us as legislators and to keep pushing for the rental assistance, the housing assistance that we so desperately need for all Minnesotans.
I really think the key to this is the communication part of it. As a landlord, there's nothing that I appreciate more is when the tenant says, hey, we've got an issue, how are we going to work through it? And what's unique about this situation, we are all in this together, is that not only does it hit the renters, but it hits the landlords too. So while renters are really nervous about what they're doing, so are landlords. And we've really got to be great in our communication about saying, hey, we're going to be there for you as much as we can, and reciprocate that.
There's a question from Kevin Featherly mentioning that Representative Doubt said on the floor that we always have to ask where the money comes from. What's the answer here?
And I can speak to that a bit. Fortunately, we started a few years ago to say we need to build up a significant cash reserve. And the governor redoubled his efforts to make certain that we're going to reach that $2 billion cash reserve. That's there for the rainy day, and it's a rainy day today. Beyond that, so we had the cash reserve, but we also had a projected, if everything went right with our economy, we had a projected surplus in the future of, I think, what was it, 1.4 billion? I've sort of forgotten that number now. Now we know that because we're in economic hard times, that is likely not going to happen. And I think that was what Representative Doubt was making a reference to, that our forecast and our expectations for the next 2 years have changed phenomenally. But as a state, I think we are in a very good place because we have responsibly budgeted in the last few years, that we have a cushion that we can rely on.
And this is Representative Howard. That's right on. And the other thing I'd say is these are the kinds of investments we need to make so that our economy continues to function as best as we can and move forward. When you talk about our state budget perspective, if we do not provide the rental and housing assistance that our small business owners, that homeowners, that renters, that landlords need, and our whole housing ecosystem starts to collapse, you better believe we're going to have significant and lasting budget problems at the state level. So I see this as one of the more cost-effective ways we can move forward so that Minnesota's economy can function its best as it can, and that we can speed the recovery that will have to come once we get through these incredibly challenging times. I don't see any other questions. I really want to thank everyone for joining a virtual press conference. And this is our new normal, but I really appreciate this forum and ability to be able to communicate with the public and with the press about these important issues. Stay tuned. We're going to keep working on this and hope to come back on April 14th and pass a significant piece of legislation that is so needed. So again, thank you all very much, and we'll see you soon.